So does God exist? Well, I'm going to show you two of the most common and actually quite powerful proofs for the existence of God, but how they go horribly wrong and actually show that you are God. That's right, you. Hey guys, my name is Morgue, and if you are new to this channel, join our War of the Mind and watch us wake up the world by subscribing right now. And my content is controversial, so make sure you hit the bell so that you know when something new comes out. When it comes to the existence of God, most people rely on faith, stories, and personal experiences. However, there are some that actually try to prove the existence of God somewhat rationally. So can you rationally prove the existence of God? We're going to find out right now. These arguments are actually quite old, having been popularized by St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century and going so far back as Aristotle 300 years BC. But we're going to take a look at the most updated versions of them right now. The first argument that we're going to look at is called the cosmological argument. And the cosmological argument says that whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And theists, of course, conclude that God is that cause. This relies on the impossibility of infinite regress. Essentially, if you look at existence as a causal chain of events, the argument is that there must be someone or something to have started that chain of events. In other words, if you imagine a sequence of dominoes knocking each other over, the argument essentially relies on the fact that you can't have these dominoes just going on and on and on forever. There had to be someone or something to push over that first domino. Theists conclude that if that is true, then God is the first domino pusher, so to speak. Now, the cosmological argument can appear very powerful, and it stood the test of time, but we're going to look at the major flaws in it and show that it actually shows that you are God. The next argument for the existence of God is called the teleological argument. Now, the teleological argument basically says, if you look around you at the natural world, it seems like things were intelligently designed. For example, I am a being that breathes oxygen, and I happen to be in a world that provides oxygen for me. It is saying that this seems to be beyond mere chance or randomness, but that an intelligent designer has to be behind this ordering. An example that's often used is if you were to find a watch on the floor, you wouldn't conclude that that watch just randomly came together, but that there was an intelligent designer behind it. Well, the teleological argument tries to say the same thing for the universe itself. It says, look at all the ordering and structure in this world. Well, there must have been a designer, an intelligent, intentional design behind it. And theists conclude that that designer is God. So these can seem like pretty convincing arguments for the existence of God, but are they really? Let's dive in and break them down. One of the major problems with these arguments is that if they're true, they say something very specific about existence. However, theists make a huge leap by saying that these arguments are proof for the God of the Bible. For example, Aristotle was one of the originators of the cosmological argument, and he lived over 300 years before Christ was even born. So when he was forming these arguments, he certainly did not have the God of the Christian faith in mind when he was putting forth his rationale. So for a moment, let's take for granted that these arguments are true. If they are, what do they actually say? Well, once again, the cosmological argument says that whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, if this is true, what this says is that there must be an eternal, necessary, and uncaused being, thing, or force that caused the universe to begin. So whatever caused the universe to begin must have these properties of being eternal, necessary, and uncaused. To say that the cosmological argument proves the existence of the biblical God is completely false. The biblical God has very specific properties. He created the earth in 7 days, had a son named Jesus Christ, cares about you supposedly, things like this. The cosmological argument says nothing about this. All it says is that for the universe to have begun, something must have caused it, and that something must be eternal, necessary, and uncreated. Next, the teleological argument shows that this reality is one of order and structure and organization. It does not show that the God of the Bible intelligently and consciously designed the universe. So as we explore these arguments further and show how they show that you are God, it's important to remember what they are actually saying. They do not show that the God of the Bible exists and created the universe. What they show is that something must have existed that is eternal, necessary, and uncaused, and that this reality exhibits rational ordering and structure. So let's dive in. What do these properties of necessary, eternal, and uncaused actually mean? Well, eternal just means that it has always existed. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. Necessary means that it must exist. It's impossible for it to not exist. Its existence is mandatory. And uncaused simply means that nothing caused it to exist. If something caused it to exist, it wouldn't be necessary and it wouldn't be eternal. It would just be another domino in the row. This would of course lead to infinite regress. So it's eternal, it's always existed, it's necessary, it must, it has to exist, and it's uncaused. Nothing caused it to exist. You'll notice that the cosmological argument shows that something must have these properties. However, it doesn't give any explanation to how that thing could exist. It doesn't give an explanation or a reason for its existence. For example, if we call that thing God, the cosmological argument might show that God exists, but it wouldn't say how God could exist. What is the reason for God's existence? How can God exist? Now, there are some more problems with these arguments, but with these properties in mind, let's begin to dive into how you are God. To begin, let's all get on the same page and agree that reason, rationality, leads to truth. Now, the reason why we're saying this is because if you disagree with that, you might as well not even be watching this, because this whole video is about rational proofs for God and argumentation and giving reasons for the existence of things. If you don't agree that reasons lead to truth, then it doesn't matter what reasons I give you or what arguments I make, because you're denying the validity of reason itself. So we're going to begin by agreeing that reason leads to truth. Now I'm going to show that by accepting that this reality is not physical, but is instead a mental, mathematical reality, and that you are an eternal mind, that it ticks off all the boxes of the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and shows that you are in fact God. Let's examine this rationally. So, we are saying that this is a mathematical reality of mind. And what does this mean precisely? That this is an existence of frequency patterns defined by sinusoidal waves. Now, a sinusoidal wave of mind contains all values within it, both positive and negative. What this means is that it's equivalent to 0. This is going to be very important. So this is an existence of mathematical frequency patterns whose sum total adds to 0. So what is an eternal mind? An eternal mind is simply the sum total, the collection of all possible frequency patterns. And the sum total of those frequency patterns is, of course, 0. This means that an eternal mind is mathematically defined by 0. A mind is 0. If you're having trouble understanding it, think of it this way. If you added up every single value, both positive and negative, the result would be 0. A mind is simply a collection of all possible mathematical values and that means its sum total is equal to 0. Now, of course, mathematically speaking, 0 is equivalent to the concept of nothingness. So to recap, an eternal mind is equal to 0, which contains all frequencies, all mathematical values within itself, which is equal to nothingness. Having rationally defined what an eternal mind is, let's see how it relates to the cosmological argument. Well, a mind is rationally and mathematically equivalent to the concept of nothingness. And the concept of nothingness is eternal, necessary, and uncaused. It's eternal because nothingness is not something that can be created. It's something that has always existed. It's necessary because nothing must exist. It's impossible for nothing to not exist. Try to do a thought experiment right now where you were to destroy nothingness or stop nothingness from existing. It's impossible. The existence of nothingness is mandatory. And of course, nothing is uncaused. You can't cause nothingness. Nothingness just is. It's eternal, necessary, and uncaused. So by introducing a mathematical entity that we have labeled an eternal mind that contains all mathematical values within itself so that its sum total is equal to 0, is equal to nothingness, which means that it has the properties of being necessary, eternal, and uncaused. Not only does this mathematical entity that we have labeled an eternal mind check off all the boxes of the cosmological argument, it also explains how this entity could exist. This is something that the cosmological argument in itself fails to do. In other words, how God can exist is never given. However, how an eternal mind, a mathematical entity defined as we have done so, is easily explainable by the fact that nothingness is necessarily inexistent, meaning that it exists by the fact that it is nothing. Nothing must exist. That is how nothing can exist. Its existence is mandatory. But let's look at another flaw of the cosmological argument. You'll notice that the cosmological argument points towards a necessary, uncaused, eternal being. However, it doesn't say anything about there being a multiplicity of such beings. In other words, if one of these necessary, eternal, uncaused entities can exist, there's nothing to stop a multiplicity, a plurality of them existing. Now, this is a big problem for monotheists because they want to say that only one God exists. However, the cosmological argument has no such restriction. If one necessary, eternal, uncaused entity is possible, then a multiplicity, a plurality of necessary, eternal, uncaused entities must be possible. There's nothing to prevent their existence. Looking at this mathematically, how we have defined an eternal mind, if one eternal mind is equivalent to 0, there is nothing preventing the existence of a multiplicity of zeros. If one unit of nothingness is possible, there is nothing to prevent a myriad, a plurality of units of nothingness. In fact, the principle of sufficient reason shows that if one is possible and there's nothing to prevent more than one, then there must be a multiplicity. Again, this is quite a big problem for monotheists. However, it's no problem with our system of mathematical idealism, because now, instead of just having one eternal mind, we have a multiplicity of eternal minds, and that's perfectly fine. So we now have a multiplicity of eternal minds, each one being mathematically equivalent to 0 because they contain within itself all possible values, all possible frequencies. Here is another huge problem with the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument says that everything that begins must have a cause. Now, if you take begins as meaning to be created, That violates the law of conservation of energy, which says that nothing can be created or destroyed, only transformed. In other words, what this means is that nothing can exist apart from that uncreated, necessary, eternal being or beings. That eternal being or beings can't genuinely create anything new. If it wants to create anything, it has to create it from itself by taking its own nature and transforming it into another form. Now, this is no problem for eternal minds, because once again, what are eternal minds? They are containers of mathematical frequency patterns. So what they can do is take their internal mathematical frequencies and combine and transform them to create the universe. This means that they are creating the universe from their own internal patterns, their own energy, which means that nothing exists except for eternal minds and their frequency patterns. That's it. That's all that exists. Nothing else. Everything else, the universe, is simply a transformation, another way of looking at their internal frequency patterns, transformed in a certain way. And this is all in line with the law of conservation of energy. Once again, to reiterate, nothing can ever be genuinely created. This is a logical impossibility. Things can only be transformed from one form into another. And we have the form of mathematical frequency patterns being transformed into what we experience as the world around us. Now let's look how this fits in with the teleological argument. Because at the moment we have defined a multiplicity of eternal minds, which are a container of mathematical frequency patterns that all sum to zero, that combine and interact to form the material universe. This means that eternal minds are the creators, or more aptly called transformers, of the material universe. However, in the early stages of the universe, the material world isn't consciously designed. Eternal minds are not yet conscious beings. They are unconscious, and they're simply following mathematical rule sets, mathematical patterns. And the universe is generated by the combining features of these mathematical patterns. In other words, the material universe is generated by necessary and eternal mathematical laws interacting with each other in an unconscious way. It's not being consciously designed. In other words, it's mathematically evolving. And the teleological argument does not show that there is a conscious, intelligent designer behind existence. All it shows is that this existence follows a rational, structured ordering, and mathematical laws perfectly fit the bill. Let's take Conway's game of life, for example. In Conway's game of life, a few very simple rules are selected, and then a game is allowed to evolve from those very simple rules. And when you watch the patterns that originate, they start to resemble and mimic very simple life. Now, are these patterns actually alive? No, they're not. However, it shows that if you start with rules, something that looks like that it was designed can emerge. Now imagine a rich system of living mathematics. Imagine a system of mathematics itself with its complex laws. Mathematics is so incredibly complex and rich that Gödel showed that no human-invented system of axiomatic logic could ever successfully model it. So imagine a system of such complexity given billions of years to evolve. Of course, something with brilliant rational ordering, life, and vibrancy would arise. So the cosmological and the teleological argument do not point towards the existence of a monotheistic God. Instead, what we have defined as eternal minds fit the bill much more precisely. It is true that uncaused, eternal, necessary beings must exist, and that this is a reality of rational ordering, and eternal minds fit that bill perfectly. Eternal minds are units of nothingness that contain mathematical patterns of every possible value, and these are the only things that can possibly exist. And this is what you are. This is what each and every one of us truly is. We are all eternal minds. So a monotheistic God is not the creator of the universe. Rather, it is us as eternal minds. We are the creators, rather the transformers of this existence. We are that which has brought all of this into reality. This is a shared dream that we have created from our internal mathematical frequency patterns. The material universe was not consciously created. It was unconsciously mathematically generated. Mathematical mind was transformed into mathematical matter, very similar to how your mind generates a dream world. However, this is a collective dream. As we grow and evolve and question existence, as you are doing so right now, we become more conscious of what we truly are. And each one of us has the capacity of evolving into a powerful god or goddess. And all of us taken together form the universe itself, the true God, the absolute, all of reality and all of existence. The cosmological argument has a lot of flaws. However, our system of ontological mathematics proves this flawlessly, and I'll put some links in the description of this video where you can learn more about ontological mathematics so you can know it for yourself. If you want to know more, watch this video here, this one as well. Make sure you subscribe to my channel right now, drop a comment below, and if you support my work, consider supporting on Patreon so I can bring you even more content. My name is Morgue, and I am Hyperion. Ad Astra to the stars.